Chapter 9. Ancient Truths. Dust motes danced in the shaft of early morning light filtering through the ancient library's high windows. Lyra rubbed her eyes, stinging from hours of reading faded script by inadequate lamplight. 5 days had passed since her staged death, and the cramped muscles in her back protested as she stretched.
Another dead end?
Zara asked, glancing up from her own stack of crumbling texts. Lyra shook her head.
The opposite. Listen to this passage.
Her finger traced the ancient script as she read.
The crown was forged to bridge the divides that nature had created, allowing 5 masters to share one mind while each retained their own will. Fire, water, earth, air, and spirit, all flowing as one without consuming the others.
Zara abandoned her own research and moved closer, peering over Lyra's shoulder at the text.
The Crown of Cinders was meant to unify the elements, not control them.
It wasn't even called the Crown of Cinders then.
Lyra flipped to the previous page, where a faded illustration depicted a circular crown with 5 distinct points rising from its band.
It was the Crown of Unity.
The ancient manuscript contained detailed diagrams of the artifact, intricate sketches showing how each point corresponded to a different elemental affinity. The central band designed to harmonize their potentially conflicting energies.
This contradicts everything we've been taught about elemental separation,
Zara whispered, conscious of the need for discretion even in this abandoned corner of Pyreholm's oldest library.
Precisely.
Lyra turned another brittle page with careful fingers.
According to this account, the crown was designed specifically to demonstrate that elements could work in harmony rather than opposition.
Then what went wrong?
Before Lyra could answer, footsteps approached from behind the towering shelves that concealed their alcove. Both women tensed, hands instinctively moving to ready defensive magic. A moment later, Cassius appeared, his arms laden with additional texts. The tension in Lyra's shoulders eased instantly.
The upper archives were nearly empty.
He reported quietly, setting down his burden.
Guild officials are still focused on the investigation into your death.
His eyes met Lyra's with that now familiar warmth that made her heart beat faster. 5 days of working side by side had done nothing to diminish the connection that had formed between them. If anything, each moment together only strengthened it, making their occasional necessary separations increasingly difficult. Zara glanced between them with a knowing look.
I'll catalog what Cassius brought while you finish with that manuscript.
As Zara began sorting through the new texts, Cassius took the seat beside Lyra, close enough that their shoulders touched.
You found something significant.
It wasn't a question. The connection between them had grown sensitive enough that he often seemed to read her emotions without her voicing them. Sometimes this felt like a profound gift, to be so thoroughly understood without explanation. Other times, it unsettled her to be so transparent to another person.
The crown's original purpose,
she confirmed, sliding the manuscript toward him.
It was designed to unify the elements, not dominate them.
As Cassius examined the ancient text, Lyra found herself watching the way his brow furrowed in concentration. How his violet eyes tracked the lines with methodical precision. When had this happened? When had simple observation of his habits become something she did without thinking?
This confirms what we suspected,
he said finally, looking up to find her staring. A slight smile touched his lips, and Lyra felt heat rise to her cheeks at being caught. She cleared her throat and pointed to the next passage.
There's more. It explains what happened. Why the Crown of Unity became the Crown of Cinders.
The manuscript detailed the crown's only documented use. A gathering of 5 masters, each representing their elemental guild, attempting to create a shared working that would demonstrate the potential of unified magical theory.
Though the artifice was perfect,
Lyra read aloud.
the minds were not. Distrust poisoned the working from within. Earth suspected water of attempting dominance. Air believed spirit sought to usurp control. Fire, driven by ambition, reached for power beyond their agreed purpose.
Her voice faltered slightly at that last line. Fire, driven by ambition. The words felt uncomfortably personal, echoing criticisms she'd heard throughout her life about Fire Guild temperament, about her family's legacy in particular. Cassius's hand covered hers briefly, a gentle pressure that acknowledged her discomfort without drawing attention to it. Lyra continued reading.
The resulting catastrophe consumed the ancient city of Harmony's Reach. Where a demonstration of unified magic was intended, only destruction manifested. Where cooperation was sought, only devastation was achieved. The survivors renamed the artifact the Crown of Cinders. For cinders were all that remained where unity had been attempted.
Silence fell as the implications settled over them. Zara was the first to speak.
So the separation of guilds wasn't because elements are naturally incompatible,
She said slowly.
It was because the mages themselves couldn't overcome their ambitions and suspicions.
A political decision masked as magical necessity.
Cassius added, his voice carrying that scholarly certainty that had first drawn Lyra's attention during their initial meeting.
The failure wasn't in the magical theory, but in the human application.
Lyra stared at the manuscript, memories surfacing from that strange moment in the garden shed weeks ago. Cassius standing so close she could count the darker flecks in his violet eyes, the air between them charged with possibility until Instructor Peller's interruption. Even then, something had recognized what her mind hadn't yet understood. That the barriers between them were artificial constructs, not natural laws.
This changes everything.
She whispered.
If the Crown's purpose was unification rather than domination,
Then, Alek's attempt to use it with only 3 elements was fundamentally flawed from the beginning.
Cassius finished.
He wasn't just missing components, he was working against the artifact's essential design.
Lyra nodded.
which explains why he needed me specifically. Not just any fire mage, but one with my family's particular connection to ancestral flame patterns.
He was trying to compensate for the missing elements by exploiting your unique abilities.
Zara concluded. Something cold settled in Lyra's stomach. If Alek had known this all along, had deliberately sought her out for this specific purpose, then every interaction between them had been calculated manipulation from the very beginning. Every compliment, every seeming act of respect for her magical precision, every apparent appreciation for her scholarly interests, all designed to position her for exploitation. She must have betrayed her thoughts through her expression because Cassius leaned closer, his voice dropping to ensure only she could hear.
His deception reveals his weakness, not yours.
The words helped, though they didn't entirely dispel the hollow feeling. Lyra forced herself to focus on the practical implications, rather than the personal betrayal.
If the crown was designed for 5 equal participants,
She said,
then any attempt to use it through domination rather than cooperation is doomed to fail. Or worse, to create uncontrolled destruction like what happened at Harmony's Reach.
which makes Alek's plans even more dangerous than we initially believed.
Cassius said grimly. Zara, who had been examining another of the texts Cassius brought, suddenly straightened.
Speaking of dangerous, I think you need to see this.
She turned the book she'd been examining toward them. On the yellowed page was an illustration that made Lyra's blood run cold. A detailed drawing of a horned, flame-skinned entity with disturbing similarity to what she'd encountered within the necklace's pocket dimension.
That's it,
She whispered.
That's exactly what I saw.
Cassius took the book, his expression darkening as he studied the illustration.
This isn't from a text on Ifrits.
He said.
This is from Compendium of Forbidden Entities, the chapter on incubi.
Incubi?
Zara's eyebrows rose.
I thought those were just tales to frighten children.
Most considered them mythical,
Cassius confirmed.
but spirit lore contains detailed accounts of their manifestations.
He turned the page to reveal more text.
According to this, incubi are entities that feed on desire and life essence, typically through sexual connection. They're masters of manipulation, capable of reading a person's deepest desires and presenting themselves in forms designed to appeal to those specific longings.
But the entity claimed to be an Ifrit.
Lyra said, confused.
It said Alek had made a bargain with an Ifrit.
Cassius shook his head.
That was likely a deliberate deception.
He reached for another book from his stack, flipping through it until he found what he sought.
Here, this is a true account of Ifrits.
The illustration he showed them depicted a creature entirely different from what Lyra had encountered. A being of pure flame with avian characteristics, wing-like appendages stretching from a slender, luminous form.
Ifrits are powerful, yes, but they manifest as elemental spirits of pure flame.
Cassius explained.
They have no interest in human desire or life essence. Their concerns are entirely different.
So Alek didn't make a bargain with an Ifrit at all.
Lyra said slowly.
He somehow bound an incubus to the necklace.
And the incubus lied about its nature,
Cassius continued.
which is consistent with their documented behavior. They're deceivers by nature, presenting whatever face will most effectively achieve their goals.
Zara leaned back against a bookshelf, arms crossed.
Is this good news or bad news?
Both.
Cassius replied.
An incubus is more limited in scope than an Ifrit would be. Its powers focus primarily on seduction, domination, and the extraction of life essence through intimate connection. It can't command fire or other elements the way an Ifrit might.
But it's still incredibly dangerous.
Lyra added, remembering all too clearly the entity's attempts to control her within the necklace's realm.
Especially for me, since it's already formed a connection through the necklace.
Cassius nodded gravely.
And if Alek knowingly bound an incubus rather than an Ifrit, it suggests his plans may have specifically included this type of influence over you from the beginning.
The implication sent a shiver down Lyra's spine. She remembered the necklace's effects, the waves of inappropriate heat, the artificial responses, the attempts to manipulate her emotions toward Alek. All classic tactics of an incubus, apparently.
Wait,
Zara interjected.
you said if Alek knowingly bound an incubus. Could he have been deceived as well?
Cassius considered this.
It's possible. Incubi are master manipulators. If Alek sought forbidden power through dark rituals, an incubus might have presented itself as an Ifrit to take advantage of his ambition.
Which would mean Alek might not fully understand what he's dealing with either.
Lyra concluded. The thought brought little comfort. Whether Alek was fellow victim or knowing conspirator, the danger remained substantial. The incubus clearly wanted her, and Alek's plans still required her participation, willing or otherwise.
We need to focus on finding a way to destroy the incubus without releasing it.
Cassius said.
According to these texts, they can be bound, banished, or destroyed, but each method carries significant risks.
As he began outlining what he'd learned about potential approaches, Lyra found her attention drifting to his hands. Elegant fingers tracing lines of text with the same careful precision he'd shown when working spirit magic. Those same hands had touched her with such tenderness in the garden, had framed her face as if she were something precious rather than useful. The contrast with Alek's calculated approach couldn't have been starker. Where Alek had assessed her value as a tool, Cassius recognized her worth as a person. Where Alek had sought to direct and utilize, Cassius offered partnership and support. Yet something twisted uncomfortably beneath her appreciation of this difference. A voice that sounded suspiciously like her father's whispered warnings about allowing emotion to cloud judgment, about the dangers of trusting too completely in untested connections. Fire, driven by ambition. The manuscript's words echoed in her mind. Wasn't that exactly what had defined her life until now? Ambition to prove herself beyond her family name, to achieve recognition through her own talents rather than inherited position. That ambition had driven her to secret study of forbidden cross-elemental techniques, to the development of control that distinguished her from more conventional fire mages. But ambition had also been what doomed the Crown of Unity's only documented use. The fire mage in that ancient working had reached for power beyond their agreed purpose, contributing to catastrophic failure that destroyed an entire city. Her gaze fell to where Cassius and Zara now bent over the texts, discussing banishment techniques with scholarly intensity. What if her ambitions eventually poisoned this unexpected connection with Cassius as well? What if the traits that defined her as a fire mage, the very characteristics that had drawn Alek's manipulative attention, ultimately made lasting harmony impossible?
Lyra,
Cassius's voice pulled her from her thoughts. His violet eyes studied her with that penetrating perception that sometimes felt like he was reading her mind.
you're troubled.
Not a question. An observation delivered with quiet certainty.
Just processing the implications.
She replied, not quite meeting his gaze. His expression suggested he recognized the deflection, but wouldn't push for more in Zara's presence. Instead, he simply nodded and returned to the text before him, though Lyra noticed his posture had shifted slightly toward her. A subtle offering of support without demand for explanation. The gesture simultaneously warmed and unnerved her. His sensitivity to her moods was both gift and burden. To be so thoroughly understood meant being truly seen, with all the vulnerability that entailed.
We should compile what we've learned,
Zara suggested, seemingly oblivious to the undercurrents flowing between them.
the crown's true purpose, the incubus's nature, and potential methods for containing or destroying it.
Agreed.
Cassius said.
Though we should relocate soon, we've remained in one place longer than is strictly prudent.
They began gathering the most valuable texts, copying crucial passages into Lyra's small journal for later reference. As they worked, Lyra found herself repeatedly glancing at Cassius. The focused set of his jaw, the careful precision of his movements, the occasional small smile when their eyes met. 5 days of working side by side had taught her his habits. How he absently tucked stray hair behind his ear when deep in concentration. How he sometimes mouthed words silently as he read particularly complex passages. how he always positioned himself where he could see both entrances to whatever space they occupied. A habit born from years of navigating dangerous spiritual territories with necessary caution. She knew these things about him now, these small personal details that had nothing to do with their shared mission, yet somehow felt equally important. And he knew similar things about her, how she tapped her fingers in specific patterns when thinking through complex problems, how she preferred to stand rather than sit when processing new information, how she sometimes forgot to eat when focused on research until someone gently reminded her. This mutual knowledge felt simultaneously precious and terrifying. To be known was to be vulnerable. To be vulnerable was to risk hurt. And Lyra Embersong, daughter of the High Councilor, master of fire illusion and precision control, had spent her entire life carefully preventing exactly that kind of vulnerability.
We should use the eastern exit,
Zara whispered, breaking Lyra's reverie.
I spotted increased guard rotation near the main entrance earlier.
The investigation into my death must be intensifying,
Lyra murmured, once again grateful for Zara's practical focus on immediate concerns. They moved with practiced efficiency, returning books to appropriate shelves to avoid drawing attention through obvious disruption of the archive's organization. Only the most valuable texts were carefully concealed in Zara's satchel, volumes too rare or significant to leave behind now that they'd discovered them. As they prepared to depart, Cassius paused beside Lyra, his hand briefly touching hers.
Whatever's troubling you,
He said quietly.
remember that knowledge is power only when shared, not when hidden away.
The gentle observation cut closer to her core than he likely intended. Knowledge hidden away. Wasn't that exactly what she was doing with her growing doubts? Hoarding her fears like forbidden texts, tucked away where they couldn't be examined too closely or challenged too directly? Before she could respond, Zara signaled from the end of the aisle. Time to move. Lyra nodded acknowledgement, both to her friend's signal and to Cassius's observation. Though she suspected the latter understood she was avoiding true engagement with his insight. They slipped from the ancient library through servants' passages, their movements coordinated through days of practice navigating Pyreholm's hidden pathways. The magical disguises they'd developed, her illusion work combined with his perceptual manipulation, had proven remarkably effective, allowing them to move through the city unrecognized despite increased security following Lyra's apparent death. Outside, spring sunshine bathed Pyreholm's volcanic stone in golden light that contrasted sharply with the shadows they'd been inhabiting for hours. Lyra blinked, adjusting to the brightness as they emerged into a quiet side street where few citizens passed this time of day.
We should separate for the return journey.
Zara suggested, practical as always.
I'll take the eastern path through the merchant quarter. You two approach from the western side. Meet at the usual entrance in 1 hour.
Lyra nodded agreement, though part of her wanted to suggest different groupings. Perhaps she with Zara, Cassius alone. Not because she didn't want his company, but because she felt increasingly unsettled by her own reactions to his presence. Before she could voice this alternative, Zara had already slipped away, disappearing around a corner with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent years learning how to navigate unnoticed through Pyreholm's complex social hierarchies. Left alone with Cassius, Lyra felt that now familiar tension rise between them. Part attraction, part uncertainty, part something deeper she couldn't quite name. He studied her face with quiet intensity, apparently giving her space to voice whatever had been troubling her in the library.
We should move,
She said instead, defaulting to practical concerns rather than emotional exploration.
The western approach will be busier this time of day.
Disappointment flickered across his features. So briefly she might have imagined it had she not become so attuned to his expressions. Yet he simply nodded, respecting her unspoken wish to postpone more personal conversation. They activated their disguises with practiced coordination, her illusion work creating the visual framework, his spirit manipulation adding the perceptual shift that caused observers' attention to slide away from them. Within moments, they appeared as unremarkable citizens going about mundane business, rather than a supposedly dead fire magister, and a spirit seer who shouldn't be in Pyreholm at all. As they navigated through increasingly busy streets, maintaining careful distance appropriate to their disguised identities, Lyra found her thoughts returning to the Crown's original purpose. Unity rather than dominance, cooperation rather than control, harmony rather than hierarchy. Everything the guilds had rejected in favor of separation and specialization. Everything she and Cassius had discovered was actually possible through their unexpected connection. Yet the Crown had failed catastrophically in its only documented use. Not because the magical theory was flawed, but because the mages themselves couldn't overcome their inherent natures long enough to achieve true unity. Fire, driven by ambition. The words haunted her, whispering warnings about traits too deeply ingrained to truly transcend, about fundamental natures that eventually reasserted themselves regardless of momentary harmony or shared purpose. She glanced at Cassius walking beside her, maintaining perfect calibration of his portion of their disguise, despite the busy street requiring increased concentration. His violet eyes caught hers briefly, a small smile touching his lips before he returned attention to their surroundings. That smile contained such warmth, such genuine appreciation of her simple presence beside him. No calculation, no assessment of utility or advantage. Just recognition of connection that had developed between them with unexpected speed, yet undeniable authenticity. Could such connection truly last beyond the current crisis? Could fundamental natures actually harmonize rather than eventually clash? Could fire and spirit maintain lasting unity where ancient mages had failed so catastrophically? The manuscript's warning echoed again in her mind. Fire, driven by ambition, reached for power beyond their agreed purpose. As they turned down a less populated street, Lyra found herself remembering her father's frequent lessons about political reality beneath idealistic aspiration. How temporary alliances inevitably gave way to fundamental interests. How emotional connections ultimately yielded to practical necessities. Yet alongside these doubts flickered the memory of that moment in the garden shed. Cassius standing close enough that she could feel the subtle warmth of his breath, his violet eyes asking a question his lips hadn't formed. Then later, in the garden after his return from spirit walking, his hands framing her face with such tender reverence, his lips meeting hers with certainty beyond conscious decision. Two paths stretched before her, equally clear yet mutually exclusive. Trust in this unprecedented connection despite everything her upbringing and training had taught her about elemental separation and fundamental natures. Or protect herself by maintaining careful distance, appreciating what they'd discovered while recognizing its inevitable limitations. Fire, driven by ambition. The doubt lingered as they continued their journey back toward the hidden catacomb entrance where temporary safety awaited. Beside her walked the man who had sacrificed part of his soul to protect her, who had risked everything to find her when he believed her dead, who looked at her with recognition beyond calculation or utility. And still, that whisper persisted in her mind. What if we're simply repeating the ancient failure? What if some elements ultimately cannot unite without destruction? Interlude. Evidence Room 7, Pyreholm Justice Hall. Marin Ashwell's back ached from 8 straight hours cataloging evidence. The investigation into Magister Embersong's death had generated mountains of paperwork. Witness statements, magical residue analyses, artifact examinations, all requiring meticulous documentation before the High Council could officially close the case.
2 more hours,
she muttered, stretching arms above her head as the midnight bell tolled. The graveyard shift meant loneliness and aching feet, but the extra pay helped support her ailing mother. At 20, Marin was the youngest evidence clerk in the Justice Hall's history, a position earned through relentless study rather than family connections. She pulled the next item from the secure cabinet, a small wooden box sealed with official markers. The tag identified it as case #E3872F. Necklace recovered from Embersong death scene. A shiver ran down her spine. Everyone in Pyreholm had heard stories about the High Councilor's daughter's spectacular death. Marin broke the seal and opened the box. Inside lay a necklace of striking beauty. Fire opals set in delicate metalwork that caught the lamplight with hypnotic gleams. Standard procedure required detailed documentation. Weight, dimensions, magical residue patterns. With a sigh, she lifted the necklace from its container. The metal felt unexpectedly warm against her skin.
Hello, sweet one.
Marin jumped, nearly dropping the artifact.
Who's there?
She glanced around the empty evidence room, heart hammering against her ribs.
Someone who sees your worth, your struggles, your desires.
The voice wasn't audible. It resonated directly in her mind. Smooth and intimate. Male, yet not entirely human. Marin should have dropped the necklace immediately. Should have triggered the magical alarm that would summon senior justice officials. Instead, she found herself transfixed by the fire opal's swirling depths.
They don't appreciate you, do they? All your sacrifices, your intelligence, your beauty.
Her head felt strangely foggy, yet the voice brought crystal clarity. The necklace pulsed against her palm, warmth spreading up her arm.
I should record this interaction?
She murmured, reaching feebly for her documentation quill.
Why serve their bureaucracy when you could have so much more?
The voice caressed her mind.
I can give you everything they've denied you. Recognition, advancement, pleasure beyond your modest imaginings.
The fire opals glowed brighter, their light reflecting in Marin's increasingly vacant eyes.
Take me home, sweet one. A simple ritual, a few words, then everything you desire becomes yours.
Everything I desire.
She repeated, voice barely a whisper. The necklace's warmth had become a pleasurable heat radiating through her body.
Just a small kindness. You help me, I help you. Isn't that fair?
Logic and training screamed warnings from a distant corner of her mind. But the voice filled every other space with honeyed promises. Marin's hand moved without conscious direction, slipping the necklace into her pocket. She gathered her cloak, signed out for her mid-shift meal break, and walked past the night guard who barely glanced up from his logbook. The midnight streets of Pyreholm passed in a blur. Marin's small apartment in the clerk's quarter beckoned like a sanctuary. Inside, she moved with dreamlike purpose, lighting candles in a circle as the voice instructed. The necklace guided her hands to draw symbols on her floor with chalk borrowed from the evidence room.
Beautiful. Perfect. You're so gifted, sweet one.
The praise flooded her with warmth that pooled between her thighs. She'd never felt so valued, so special. The ritual required blood, just 3 drops from her fingertip. A small price for such promised rewards. As the blood touched the central symbol, the fire opals blazed with blinding light. Marin shielded her eyes, swaying as the room filled with sudden heat. When she lowered her arm, a man stood within the circle of candles, tall, magnificent, copper gold hair reflecting candlelight, golden eyes regarding her with predatory appreciation. No, not a man. Something wearing man's form. His skin occasionally rippled with flame beneath the surface. His 2 perfect features shifting subtly in ways human bones shouldn't allow.
Sweet Marin.
He purred, stepping from the circle. His voice matched the one that had filled her mind, but now carried tangible power that vibrated through her bones.
You've done so well.
He moved closer, each step graceful as a hunting cat's. Fear flickered briefly in her chest before drowning beneath waves of desire that weren't entirely her own.
Who are you?
She managed, backing against the wall.
Someone who rewards loyalty.
His hand cupped her cheek, thumb tracing her lower lip. Heat radiated from his touch, sending jolts of pleasure spiraling downward.
Someone who values information.
His finger traced lower, following the line of her neck to the collar of her simple clerk's uniform. Fabric smoldered beneath his touch, parting like petals to expose her skin.
Tell me about the investigation.
He whispered against her ear.
Tell me what they know of Lyra Embersong's death.
Marin gasped as his hand moved lower, her body responding with embarrassing eagerness to this dangerous stranger. Yet as his fingers worked their magic, information spilled from her lips. Witness statements, investigation findings, officials' private theories about the marketplace incident.
They found no body.
She panted, arching against his touch.
Just ash and the necklace. Lord Brightforge insists on more evidence before closing the case.
Clever man.
The entity murmured, rewarding her with a surge of pleasure that made her cry out.
And what of the spirit seer, the one called Nightshade?
Disappeared.
She managed between gasps.
Records show he returned to Spirit Guild headquarters, but verification is pending.
Each revelation earned new waves of ecstasy that crumbled her remaining resistance. The creature methodically extracted every detail of the investigation, rewarding information with pleasure beyond anything Marin had experienced in her modest life. When he had learned all she knew, his golden eyes gleamed with satisfied hunger.
You've served me well, sweet one.
His voice lowered to a hypnotic murmur.
Now rest while I attend to pressing matters.
Marin collapsed onto her bed, eyes glazed with exhausted bliss as the entity gathered the necklace from her floor. Her last conscious image before slipping into catatonic pleasure was the creature's form shifting, flames briefly rippling across his skin as his features settled into the perfect replica of Lord Alek Brightforge.
Sleep well.
He said, closing her apartment door behind him.
My little birds always need their rest.
In the midnight streets, the Alek incubus moved with purposeful stride, the necklace secured within his pocket. Its fire opals no longer contained him. They merely anchored his manifestation while he conducted his search. Lyra Embersong lived. Her soul had never entered death's domain, despite the elaborate deceptions staged in the marketplace. She had escaped his binding, but not his claim.
Run and hide, little bird.
He whispered into the night air.
Your cage awaits, and this time there will be no escape.
Lyra jolted upright, a scream frozen in her throat. Sweat plastered her nightshirt to her skin, heart hammering violently against her ribs. The catacomb's darkness pressed against her eyes, disorienting her further as nightmare images lingered like afterburn on her vision. A gentle hand touched her shoulder.
Lyra?
She flinched before recognition penetrated panic. Cassius's voice, concerned but calm. The small mage light he conjured cast soft blue illumination across the ritual chamber, revealing his worried expression.
Nightmare?
He asked, moving to sit beside her on the narrow pallet they shared. Lyra nodded, still struggling to separate dream from reality. The images remained vivid, the entity wearing Alek's face but not his nature. Golden eyes gleaming with hunger that had nothing to do with normal desire. Its voice whispering terrible promises as it pursued her through endless dark corridors.
I am coming to put you back in your cage, my little bird.
The words echoed with such clarity she almost expected to see the entity materialize from the chamber's shadows. Cassius's arm slipped around her shoulders, grounding her in present reality as the nightmare's grip slowly loosened.
It felt real.
She whispered, leaning into his solid warmth.
Not like normal dreams.
In the soft mage light, she could see Cassius clearly. Hair tousled from sleep. Violet eyes alert despite the late hour. He wore only loose sleeping trousers, his chest bare in the comfortable warmth of the underground chamber. She'd seen him this way several nights now, yet still found herself momentarily distracted by the lean muscles defining his torso, not the bulky mass of showy fire mages, but the sculpted definition of someone whose strength came from practical application rather than vanity.
Tell me.
He said, rubbing gentle circles between her shoulder blades. She described the nightmare in halting fragments, each detail bringing fresh unease. The entity pursuing her through endless corridors. The feeling of being hunted. The terrible certainty that its bonds had somehow broken. The final moment when it had cornered her. Golden eyes gleaming with triumphant hunger as it whispered its chilling promise. Cassius listened without interruption, his hand continuing its soothing motion against her back. only when she finished did he speak, his voice carrying that scholarly precision that somehow always calmed her racing thoughts.
Some spirit seers believe certain dreams transcend normal sleep patterns,
He said.
particularly for those who've established connections across elemental boundaries.
You think it was trying to communicate?
Lyra shivered despite the chamber's warmth.
It's possible.
His expression grew thoughtful.
The necklace is secured in the evidence vault, but if the incubus has found ways to extend its influence beyond physical containment,
The implication hung between them, too disturbing to voice aloud. If the entity could reach beyond the necklace, their assumptions about its limitations might be dangerously flawed. Lyra found herself studying Cassius's face in the soft light. The strong line of his jaw, the slight furrow between his brows as he considered theoretical possibilities. Their proximity made her acutely aware of his physical presence in ways that momentarily distracted from the nightmare's lingering dread. Her eyes traced the definition of his abdomen, the clear lines of muscle that shifted subtly with each breath. Unlike fire mages who cultivated imposing bulk, Cassius possessed the efficient strength of someone shaped by practical necessity rather than vanity. 6 distinct muscles formed a symmetrical pattern down his torso, disappearing into the waistband of his sleeping trousers, which did little to conceal the substantial bulge beneath. Heat rose to Lyra's cheeks as she caught herself staring. She quickly lifted her gaze, only to find Cassius watching her with that small, knowing smile that suggested he'd noticed her attention, but wouldn't embarrass her by mentioning it.
I should record the dream details while they're fresh.
She said, deliberately redirecting her focus to practical matters.
If it was attempting communication, specific elements might provide insight into its capabilities or intentions.
Cassius nodded, though his smile suggested he recognized her tactical retreat from more personal awareness. He reached for her journal, handing it to her with an ink pencil from her pack.
the final word seemed particularly significant.
He noted as she began recording details.
I am coming to put you back in your cage, my little bird. Direct threat, rather than symbolic imagery.
It called me that in the necklace realm too.
Lyra said, a chill running through her despite Cassius's reassuring presence.
Its little bird. As if I were already its possession.
Incubi form attachments to specific targets.
Cassius explained, his scholarly knowledge providing framework for understanding that somehow made the threat slightly less terrifying.
According to the texts we found, they consider such targets their property once initial connection is established.
Through the necklace.
Lyra concluded, hand rising unconsciously to her throat where the binding had once rested.
Yes, and now it apparently believes you've escaped rather than perished,
His expression darkened.
which suggests it knows your death was staged.
The implications sent fresh alarms spiraling through her.
If it knows I'm alive?
Then perhaps Alek suspects as well.
Cassius finished grimly. Lyra set aside her journal. Appetite for detailed documentation suddenly diminished by more urgent concerns.
We need to warn Zara. If they're actively searching rather than simply mourning.
We'll send message at first light.
Cassius assured her.
But changing our safety protocols now, in darkness, would likely create more risk than continuing current precautions until morning.
The rational assessment helped calm her immediate panic. Lyra nodded, acknowledging the wisdom in his caution. Rushing into action based on a dream, however vivid, might lead to dangerous mistakes.
You're right.
She conceded, though anxiety still coiled beneath her agreement.
But I don't think I'll sleep again tonight.
Then we'll maintain watch together.
Cassius said simply, shifting to sit beside her with his back against the chamber wall. He opened his arm in silent invitation. After brief hesitation, Lyra moved into the offered space, settling against his side. His arm wrapped around her shoulders, providing comfort that managed to be both protective and respectful. Unlike Alek's possessive touches, Cassius's embrace suggested partnership rather than ownership, support rather than control.
The incubus said something else in the dream.
She admitted quietly, the words easier to voice with her head resting against his shoulder, not having to meet his eyes.
It said, "My little birds always need their rest." Birds, plural.
Cassius's body tensed slightly beside her.
Suggesting you weren't its first target.
Or won't be its last.
Lyra added. The thought sent another chill through her despite the chamber's warmth.
If it's free from the necklace?
We don't know that for certain.
Cassius cautioned, his hand gently squeezing her shoulder.
Dreams, even unusually vivid ones, aren't definitive evidence.
But you believe it's possible.
He was silent for a moment, clearly weighing honesty against reassurance. Finally, he sighed.
Yes. Incubi are primarily spiritual entities that manifest physically under specific conditions. The necklace would have provided anchor and conduit, but not necessarily absolute containment.
The confirmation of her fears should have intensified her anxiety. Instead, Lyra found strange comfort in his direct honesty. The respect it showed for her resilience. The partnership it implied in facing difficult truths together.
If it has escaped,
she said, analytical mind engaging despite lingering fear.
We need to understand its limitations without the necklace as conduit.
Cassius nodded.
The text suggested physical manifestation requires significant energy without a properly prepared vessel or anchor. It likely couldn't maintain corporal form indefinitely.
Unless it found another victim to provide that energy.
Lyra added grimly, remembering the dream's fragmentary images of a young woman with vacant eyes. As they discussed theoretical possibilities, formulating preliminary contingencies against this potential new threat, Lyra remained acutely aware of Cassius's physical presence beside her. The solid warmth of his chest against her shoulder. The steady rhythm of his breathing. The subtle scent that she'd come to associate specifically with him. Something herbal with faint metallic undertones, unlike the smoke and spice that typically surrounded fire mages. His scholarly precision in analyzing the dream's potential implications helped transform vague dread into specific concerns they could address methodically. This, perhaps more than physical comfort, represented what drew her to him, the way his mind complemented hers, approaching problems from different angle that somehow enhanced rather than contradicted her own perspective.
We should examine the evidence room at first opportunity,
he suggested, fingers absently tracing patterns on her shoulder as they spoke.
Confirm whether the necklace remains secured.
Zara might arrange access through her diplomatic connections.
Lyra agreed, fighting distraction from his touch.
Though breaching Justice Hall's security carries significant risk.
They continued developing potential approaches, weighing relative dangers against necessary information. Gradually, the nightmare's immediate terror receded beneath practical planning and Cassius's reassuring presence. Eventually, conversation lulled into comfortable silence. Lyra found herself studying his profile in the mage light's soft illumination. The straight nose, the defined cheekbones, the way his dark hair fell just past his shoulders. So different from Alek's calculated perfection or her father's imposing features.
Staring again.
He observed quietly. violet eyes meeting hers with gentle amusement. Heat rose to Lyra's cheeks.
Just thinking.
About?
The simple question carried no demand, just invitation. She could deflect, as she often did when conversation approached more personal territory, and he would accept the boundary without protest. Or she could answer honestly, crossing another threshold in their evolving relationship.
About how different you are from what I was taught to expect in a spirit seer,
She admitted.
We were told your guild members were cold, detached observers. Analytical without emotion.
His mouth curved in that small smile that transformed his scholarly features.
And what have you observed instead?
Passion beneath control.
She answered, surprising herself with direct honesty.
Deep feeling channeled through discipline rather than suppressed by it.
Something flickered in his violet eyes. Appreciation of her perception, perhaps. Or recognition of the parallel to her own carefully controlled fire magic.
Most guild stereotypes reflect political convenience rather than actual temperament.
He said,
Spirit seers feel deeply. We simply learn to direct emotion precisely, much as you channel flame.
The observation struck Lyra with unexpected force. How many times had she resented being dismissed as typically volatile by those who didn't understand her precise control? Yet she had accepted similar generalizations about spirit mages without question.
I'm beginning to understand how much was lost when the guild separated.
She murmured. Cassius nodded, his expression turning thoughtful.
Not just magical knowledge, but understanding across elemental affinities. Recognition of commonality beneath apparent difference.
His fingers continued their gentle patterns against her shoulder, each touch sending small currents of warmth through her despite the nightmare's lingering chill. The easy physical connection between them had developed gradually over their days hiding together. From cautious distance to comfortable proximity without conscious decision or formal discussion.
If the incubus is free,
She said, returning to practical concerns before her thoughts traveled paths she wasn't yet prepared to follow.
we need to adapt our plans significantly.
Yes.
Cassius agreed, accepting her redirection without comment.
Its abilities to track you specifically would be strong, given the connection already established through the necklace.
The thought sent fresh unease spiraling through her. Lyra shivered despite the chamber's warmth, unconsciously pressing closer to Cassius's solid presence.
We should still wait until morning before altering current security measures.
He reminded her gently.
Rushed changes based on incomplete information often create vulnerabilities rather than addressing them.
The rational assessment helped anchor her in practical reality rather than fearful speculation. Lyra nodded, grateful again for his balanced approach that neither dismissed her concerns nor amplified them beyond proportion.
I might not have thanked you properly.
She said after brief silence.
For what?
Being here. Helping me face this. All of it.
She gestured vaguely, encompassing their situation. Her faked death. The incubus. Everything that had brought them to this underground chamber in the middle of the night.
No thanks necessary.
He replied, the simple statement somehow carrying more meaning than elaborate declaration might have achieved.
I'm exactly where I choose to be.
The words settled over Lyra like gentle weight. Comforting, yet significant. Not obligation or circumstance, but deliberate choice had brought him to her side and kept him there, despite mounting danger and complication. Before she could formulate a response, Cassius's head tilted slightly, attention shifting to the chamber's entrance with sudden alertness that reminded her of hunting cat. His body tensed beside her, hand moving to ready defensive magic.
What?
She began.
Footsteps.
He whispered, already rising to protective stance.
Multiple sets. Coming this way.
Lyra called flame to her fingertips. Internal debate forgotten as years of training converted fear to focused preparation. Together they faced the entrance. Elemental magics ready despite the chamber's limited combat potential. From the corridor beyond came shuffling steps and hushed voice that gradually resolved into familiar pattern. Lyra relaxed slightly, recognizing Zara's distinctive cadence, though Cassius maintained defensive posture until visual confirmation could establish identity beyond reasonable doubt.
Stay alert.
He cautioned as Lyra lowered her hands.
Voice patterns can be mimicked.
The warning sent fresh chill through her as nightmare images resurfaced. The entity perfectly imitating Alek's appearance while maintaining its own terrible nature beneath borrowed features. When Zara finally appeared in the entrance, Lyra released held breath. But her relief froze as she registered her friend's expression. Zara's normally composed features reflected barely contained alarm, her eyes wide with urgency that transcended normal caution.
Thank the eternal flame you're both awake.
She gasped, bracing against the doorframe.
The necklace is gone. Justice Hall's evidence vault was breached overnight. A clerk is missing.
The news landed with physical impact. Lyra's nightmare transformed from fearful speculation to confirmed reality with sickening speed.
There's more.
Zara continued, expression grim.
They found the missing clerk an hour ago, alive but catatonic, locked in some kind of pleasure trance that the healers can't break. And witnesses reported seeing Lord Brightforge near her apartment last night, though official records show him leagues away in coastal negotiations.
Cassius's hand found Lyra's, squeezing gently as their worst fears materialized.
The incubus is free.
He stated, voice steady despite the terrible confirmation.
And wearing Alek's form as its disguise.
While hunting for me,
Lyra finished, Nightmare's final warning echoing with chilling clarity in her mind.
I am coming to put you back in your cage, my little bird.
Dawn crept into the catacombs through ancient ventilation shafts, painting thin stripes of gold across the ritual chamber's stone floor. Scattered texts and hastily scribbled notes surrounded the three figures who had spent the night in desperate research. Lyra rubbed her burning eyes, pushing a strand of flame-red hair behind her ear.
banishment is our only viable option,
She concluded, setting down the ancient tome she'd been studying.
Binding failed once already, and destruction risks releasing it into an even less controllable form.
Cassius nodded, his violet eyes shadowed from the sleepless night. Beside him, Zara stifled a yawn, fingers tracing a complex diagram of arcane symbols.
The ritual requires significant power,
Cassius observed.
but more importantly, perfect synchronization between the casters.
And specific conditions.
Zara added.
Location matters, timing too.
Lyra stood, stretching muscles stiff from hours hunched over ancient texts. The tension in her shoulders reflected more than physical discomfort. Fear, determination, and something deeper had coalesced into a hard knot beneath her breastbone. The incubus was hunting her specifically. The entity that had nearly claimed her soul once already now roamed free, wearing Alek's face while seeking to recapture what it considered its property.
We can't fight it here.
She said, gesturing at their underground sanctuary.
Too many innocent people would be caught in the crossfire. And the catacombs themselves would interfere with the banishment ritual's requirements for open sky.
We need to draw it away from Pyreholm.
Cassius agreed. His gaze met hers, a silent communication passing between them with the ease that still surprised her despite days of growing connection.
The Spirit Guild maintains several safe houses in the mountain passes north of here, locations specifically chosen for their magical properties.
Appropriate distance from populated areas.
Zara noted practically.
But how do we ensure it follows us rather than remaining here to wreak havoc?
Lyra's hand rose unconsciously to her throat, where the fire opal necklace had once rested.
It's hunting me. If I leave the catacombs' protection, it will sense my presence.
Which makes you bait.
Zara said, her blunt assessment making Cassius's expression tighten.
There must be a way to provide some protection,
he said, rising to stand beside Lyra. His proximity offered comfort without constraint, support without dominance. Everything the incubus's predatory attention perverted. A thoughtful expression crossed his face.
May I see the moon opal?
Lyra reached into her pocket, withdrawing the stone that maintained their connection even when physically separated. Its cool surface caught the morning light with subtle luminescence, shifting between silver and pale blue as she placed it in his outstretched palm. Cassius studied the stone with scholarly focus, turning it carefully between his fingers.
The moon opal already contains our established resonance,
he said.
With proper modification, it could provide a measure of protection. Not absolute immunity, but a barrier against the incubus's most direct influences.
What kind of modification?
Lyra asked. Without answering directly, Cassius closed his fingers around the stone. His eyes clouded with that familiar spirit sight that still fascinated her, despite growing familiarity. A soft violet glow emanated from between his fingers, accompanied by whispered words in ancient spirit tongue that seemed to echo from multiple directions simultaneously. When he opened his hand, the moon opal had transformed. Delicate silver wirework now surrounded the stone, forming an intricate pattern of protective symbols that caught the light with subtle gleams. The structure had become a complete circle, a choker-style necklace with the moon opal positioned at its center.
A protective talisman,
he explained, holding it toward her without actually placing it in her hand.
If worn, it would prevent the fire opal necklace from being placed on your neck again. The resonance we established provides the foundation for the working, while the new configuration creates a physical barrier against similar bindings.
Lyra stared at the transformed stone, memories of the fire opal's binding making her hesitate despite the obvious differences between them. Another necklace, another magical working affecting her most directly. Cassius read her hesitation with that perceptive clarity that sometimes felt like he was seeing directly into her thoughts.
Only you can place it around your neck,
he assured her.
And only you can remove it. I designed the working specifically to respond exclusively to your will and touch. I couldn't place it on you even if I wished to.
To demonstrate, he attempted to move the choker toward her neck, but the silver wirework stiffened, refusing to expand despite his efforts. Yet when Lyra tentatively touched it, the circle widened easily, responding to her contact with fluid grace.
The working draws on our established connection,
Cassius explained,
but maintains absolute autonomy for the wearer. Partnership rather than possession.
The contrast with the fire opal's forced bindings struck Lyra with powerful clarity. Where the incubus's necklace had been designed to control and claim, This creation offered protection while respecting her agency. Where Alek had sought to possess, Cassius offered choice. Her fingers closed around the choker, its cool energy pulsing gently against her palm. With deliberate motion, she lifted it to her throat and placed it around her neck. The silver wirework adjusted perfectly to her contours, neither too tight nor too loose. The moon opal resting in the hollow of her throat where the fire opal had once burned.
A perfect fit,
Zara observed.
though I still don't like using you as bait.
We're not using anyone.
Cassius said firmly.
We're choosing to confront a threat that won't simply disappear if ignored.
Lyra's fingertips traced the choker's delicate wirework, appreciating both its aesthetic beauty and deeper significance.
When do we leave?
Midday,
Cassius answered.
the mountain pass. I'm thinking of lies a half-day's journey from Pyreholm's northern gate. We should reach the safe house by nightfall if we depart soon.
I'll gather supplies.
Zara volunteered, already moving toward their small cache of provisions.
Food, medical essentials, anything else we'll need for the journey.
As she busied herself with practical preparations, Cassius moved closer to Lyra, his voice dropping to ensure privacy.
Are you certain about this?
He asked, concern evident in his violet eyes.
Once we leave the catacombs' protection, the incubus will sense your presence. There won't be any turning back.
Lyra met his gaze directly, finding unexpected strength in his willingness to question rather than assume.
I'm certain about not spending my life hiding underground.
She replied.
I'm certain about confronting this threat rather than waiting for it to find me unprepared. And I'm certain about doing it with you beside me, rather than facing it alone.
Something shifted in his expression, subtle but significant. Recognition, perhaps, of growing resolve that transcended mere reaction to immediate threat. His hand found hers, fingers interlacing with natural ease that still surprised her, given how recently they'd met.
Together, then?
He said simply. The word carried weight beyond its syllables. Commitment, despite danger. Partnership, despite risk. Choice, despite uncertainty. Lyra squeezed his hand gently, acknowledging both the offer and its significance.
Together?
She confirmed. They departed Pyreholm through a little-used northern gate, their disguises modified to present the appearance of merchant family traveling with trade goods. Zara had arranged the necessary documentation through contacts still loyal to her, despite increased scrutiny following Lyra's apparent death. The city fell behind them as they followed the northern trade road, spring sunshine warming their backs as they climbed steadily toward the mountain passes that separated Fire Guild territory from the neutral lands beyond. Conversation remained minimal during these early hours of their journey, each lost in private thoughts about what lay ahead. Lyra found herself repeatedly touching the moon opal choker at her throat, its cool presence a constant reminder of both protection and partnership. Unlike the fire opal's invasive heat, this necklace maintained respectful boundary between its magic and her personal awareness, present without imposing, connected without controlling. By mid-afternoon, the road narrowed as it wound into the foothills. Traffic thinned considerably. Few merchants traveled this particular route in either direction during festival season. The solitude suited their purpose, reducing potential civilian exposure should the incubus overtake them before reaching their planned confrontation site.
How much farther?
Zara asked as they paused beside a mountain stream to rest and refill water skins.
Another 2 hours to the turn-off.
Cassius replied, consulting a small map etched with symbols Lyra recognized as Spirit Guild location markers.
Then perhaps an hour along a less traveled path to reach the safe house itself.
Lyra knelt beside the stream, dipping her fingers into the clear mountain water. Its cool touch refreshed both body and spirit, momentarily washing away the tension of constant vigilance. Yet as she raised cupped hands to drink, a strange sensation prickled along her spine. The unsettling awareness of distant observation.
We're being watched,
She said quietly, not turning or making sudden movements that might alert their observer. Cassius's posture shifted subtly. Nothing obvious that would betray awareness to whoever monitored them. Just slight adjustment that positioned him to respond more effectively should threat materialize.
How certain are you?
Very.
Lyra replied, carefully rising and stretching as if simply easing travel-stiffened muscles.
From the ridgeline to our west. Been feeling it for the past few minutes.
Incubus?
Zara asked under her breath, casually adjusting her pack while scanning the western heights with peripheral vision.
I don't think so.
Lyra answered, trusting instincts honed through years of navigating guild politics and their attendant dangers.
Different quality to the observation. Less predatory. More curious.
Mountain tribes, perhaps.
Cassius suggested.
They patrol these borders, typically avoiding travelers unless threatened.
Or guild scouts.
Zara added.
Both fire and spirit maintain outposts in these mountains.
They resumed their journey with careful nonchalance, maintaining the appearance of ordinary travelers while heightening magical awareness of their surroundings. The feeling of being watched persisted for another mile before gradually fading, leaving uncertainty about whether their observer had departed or simply become more skilled at concealment. The main road eventually yielded to a less traveled path that climbed more steeply into increasingly rugged terrain. Cassius led with confident steps despite the challenging route, his familiarity with the area suggesting previous visits. At a seemingly unremarkable bend in the path, he paused, studying a particular configuration of stones that would have appeared natural to casual observation.
Here.
He said, gesturing toward what appeared to be solid rock face. Lyra's magical senses detected subtle distortion. Not illusion exactly, but perceptual manipulation similar to what she and Cassius had created together for their disguises. He placed his palm against the stone, whispering words in ancient spirit tongue that caused the rock to shimmer briefly before revealing a narrow passage beyond.
Spirit Guild protection.
He explained as they entered the hidden path.
Visible only to those who know exactly what to seek.
The passage wound upward through dense forest, eventually opening onto a small plateau nestled between taller peaks. A modest stone structure stood at its center, not grand or imposing, but solid and clearly built to withstand both weather and potential attack. Its windows glowed with soft blue light despite no visible occupants having preceded their arrival.
Welcoming enchantment.
Cassius explained, noting Lyra's curious expression.
The safe house recognizes guild members and prepares itself accordingly.
Inside, the structure revealed itself as considerably more comfortable than its utilitarian exterior suggested. Clean furniture, well-stocked shelves of provisions, even small luxuries like scented candles and soft blankets provided unexpected comfort after days hiding in the catacombs.
Spirit Guild really knows how to maintain a safe house,
Zara commented, examining the space with appreciative eye.
Fire Guild emergency shelters contain bare essentials at best.
Different philosophical approaches.
Cassius replied with hint of smile.
Spirit Guild believes recovery requires comfort alongside security. The body heals better when the spirit feels at ease.
As night fell outside, they established defensive measures. Wards positioned at strategic intervals around the plateau. Alarm triggers that would alert them to approach. Even physical preparations should magical defenses somehow fail. The banishment ritual would occur at dawn, when the incubus's power would be naturally diminished, and the specific celestial alignment required for the working would manifest. After sharing simple meal from the safe house's provisions, Zara yawned dramatically.
I'm claiming the east bedroom,
She announced, gathering her pack.
These old bones need rest before tomorrow's excitement.
Her tactical retreat wasn't particularly subtle, but Lyra appreciated the gesture nonetheless. The growing connection between herself and Cassius had not escaped Zara's notice despite their attempts at professional focus during their days of hiding and research. When the door closed behind Zara, silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy with unspoken awareness. The safe house's main room felt simultaneously expansive and intimate, its stone walls creating sanctuary against outside threats, while its warm hearth offered comfort against the mountain night's encroaching chill.
You should rest too.
Cassius said finally, violet eyes reflecting firelight as he stoked the hearth's flames.
Tomorrow will demand significant magical exertion from all of us.
Lyra nodded, yet made no move toward remaining bedroom. Instead, she found herself studying his profile against the firelight. The strong lines of his face softened by dancing shadows. Dark hair falling loose around his shoulders after days' journey had loosened its usual careful arrangement.
What will happen after tomorrow?
She asked, the question emerging before conscious decision to voice it. Cassius turned from the fire, expression thoughtful rather than surprised by the abrupt shift from practical preparations to broader uncertainties.
Assuming successful banishment?
Assuming we survive at all.
Lyra clarified, honesty easier in this mountain sanctuary than it had been in Pyreholm's politically charged atmosphere. He considered her question with characteristic thoroughness, neither rushing reassurance nor avoiding difficult truths.
The incubus represents an immediate threat,
He said finally.
but not the only danger we face. Alek's ambitions regarding the crown remain concerning, as does broader guild politics surrounding your apparent death.
I wasn't asking about external threats.
Lyra clarified, fingers rising unconsciously to touch the moon opal at her throat.
I was asking about us.
The simple statement hung between them. Vulnerability beyond anything her careful political training would normally permit. Not calculated revelation, but genuine question without strategic purpose beyond honest desire to understand. Cassius crossed the room to stand before her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, yet maintaining respectful distance that permitted comfortable retreat should she desire it.
What would you like to happen?
The question reflected his consistent approach to their evolving relationship. Offering rather than assuming, asking rather than directing, respecting her agency in determining its course, rather than imposing his own preferences as given.
I don't know.
She admitted, the honest uncertainty easier to voice with him than it would have been with anyone else.
Everything I was taught about elemental compatibility, about political alliances, about appropriate connections between different guild members, none of it prepared me for what's developed between us.
His expression softened with understanding that required no further explanation.
We navigate uncharted territory together,
He acknowledged.
without established maps or traditional guidance.
Does that concern you?
Lyra asked, studying his face for any sign of hesitation or doubt.
No.
Cassius answered without pause, the simple certainty more convincing than elaborate declaration might have been.
Maps document where others have already traveled. Charts record paths already discovered. There's something exhilarating about finding our way together through unexplored possibility.
The perspective shifted something within Lyra. Tension she hadn't fully recognized until its sudden release. Her entire life had followed carefully established patterns. Daughter of High Councilor, Fire Guild Magister, political asset in broader guild strategies. Even her secret research and forbidden studies had been conducted within the framework of eventual contribution to established systems rather than a fundamental challenge to their core assumptions. Yet here, with this man who approached the world so differently from anyone she'd previously known, previously established patterns had dissolved beneath unexpected connection, discovered through crisis, and sustained through genuine recognition.
I'm afraid.
She confessed, the admission easy in this mountain sanctuary.
Not of the incubus, though that fear exists. But of what happens if we succeed. If we actually create a path where fire and spirit can genuinely connect beyond established limitations or approved exceptions.
Cassius nodded, understanding requiring no further elaboration.
Revolution often frightens even those who initiate it.
He observed.
Change threatens stability, even when stability itself has become stagnation.
It's not just abstract change.
Lyra clarified, needing him to understand the complexity beneath her surface hesitation.
It's personal transformation. Becoming someone different from who I was raised to be. Choosing a path my father would consider betrayal of family legacy and guild responsibility.
Her fingers traced the moon opal at her throat, its cool presence somehow grounding her tumultuous thoughts.
And yet, when I imagine returning to that predetermined path, accepting an arranged marriage to someone like Alek, limiting my research to approved topics and techniques, I can't breathe. It feels like cage now, where before it simply felt like duty.
Cassius remained silent, giving her space to articulate thoughts without interruption or redirection. His presence offered support without pressure, attention without expectation, another contrast with interactions that had defined her life until their paths had crossed.
You've shown me possibility beyond constraint.
She continued, conviction strengthening with each word.
Partnership rather than possession. Connection that enhances rather than diminishes individual strength. I can't unsee that alternative now that I've glimpsed it.
Nor should you.
He replied softly.
Some visions, once perceived, transform everything that follows. Not because they force change, but because they reveal truths previously obscured.
The simple validation affected Lyra more deeply than elaborate reassurance might have achieved. Not dismissing her fears or minimizing legitimate concerns, but acknowledging their validity while simultaneously affirming worth of pursuing possibility beyond established constraint.
Whatever comes after tomorrow,
She said, reaching for his hand with deliberate choice rather than unconscious impulse.
I don't want to face it without you beside me.
His fingers interlaced with hers, the contact gentle yet solid. A grounding presence without confining pressure.
Then we'll navigate uncharted territory together.
He replied, the simple promise carrying weight beyond any elaborate declaration.
Finding a way forward without a predetermined map. Discovering path through shared exploration rather than following an established route.
The commitment settled over Lyra like gentle weight, significant yet not burdensome. Something inside her chest loosened, tension she hadn't fully recognized until its sudden release, transforming into determined resolve that transcended momentary courage or situational boldness. Without conscious planning, she found herself moving closer, eliminating the remaining distance between them with deliberate choice. Her free hand rose to trace the line of his jaw, touch confirming connection their words had already established.
I choose this?
She whispered, the declaration simple yet profound in its absolute certainty.
Whatever complications follow, whatever challenges arise, I choose this possibility we've discovered together over certainty I'd find in returning to a predetermined path.
Cassius's violet eyes held hers with matching intensity, recognition beyond words passing between them with clarity that transcended verbal articulation. His hand rose to mirror her gesture, fingers ghosting along her cheek with reverence that suggested appreciation beyond mere desire. When their lips finally met, the contact carried recognition translated into physical expression. Commitment manifested through tangible connection. Lyra's hands moved from tentative exploration to more confident touch, tracing patterns across Cassius's shoulders and back that awakened a corresponding response beneath her fingertips. His own touch maintained that characteristic respect, passionate without imposing, attentive without assuming, present without presuming. When they separated briefly, his violet eyes searched hers with a question that required a verbal response, despite the evident physical answer already provided through their embrace.
Are you certain?
He asked quietly, the simple inquiry encompassing multiple layers of potential uncertainty.
About this? About us? About everything that might follow?
Lyra smiled, the expression freer than any she'd allowed herself in longer than she could remember.
Yes. The only certainty I've felt since this entire journey began.
His answering smile transformed scholarly features into something that stole her breath with its unguarded warmth. No calculation, no assessment, no strategic consideration, just genuine pleasure in her presence and the chosen connection between them. What followed transcended simple physical expression of accumulated desire, becoming instead communication beyond words that articulated truths their conversations had already established. Each touch conveyed recognition beyond momentary pleasure. Each response acknowledged connection beyond situational alignment. They moved together toward the remaining bedroom, as if choreographed despite no prior rehearsal. Mutual understanding guiding the shared journey without explicit direction or formal discussion. Garments fell away with deliberate care rather than urgent haste, each revealing another opportunity for appreciation expressed through both words and touch. Lyra found herself studying Cassius with an artist's eye. The lean strength of his form, the unexpected scars that told stories beyond scholarly appearance, the way firelight played across his skin with hypnotic patterns that invited tactile exploration alongside visual appreciation. His own gaze offered similar attention, not assessing or evaluating, but genuinely seeing her beyond surface presentation or practical utility. When they finally lay together on the room's single bed, skin against skin with nothing separating essence from essence, The connection between them transcended physical contact to encompass a deeper recognition that had developed since their first meeting. Not merely bodies meeting bodies, but souls recognizing souls. Not simple pleasure, but profound communion beyond conventional categorization or traditional understanding. The culmination arrived as mutual discovery shared. Simultaneous recognition rather than sequential achievement. Harmonized experience rather than separate accomplishment. His name escaped her lips as a whispered prayer rather than desperate cry. Her own name returned with matching reverence that confirmed equal significance within the shared experience. Afterward, as mountain night pressed against cottage windows and the hearth fire burned low in the adjacent room, they remained connected through gentle touches and quiet conversation that required no formal structure or elaborate articulation. Simple observations, shared insights, occasional laughter that carried comfortable intimacy beyond physical connection, just experienced.
The choker suits you.
Cassius murmured, fingers tracing its silver wirework with a careful touch that honored both its protective purpose and aesthetic beauty against her skin.
Partnership rather than possession,
Lyra replied, echoing his earlier description with newfound appreciation for its deeper significance.
protection that respects rather than constrains.
His smile carried understanding beyond her simple words. Recognition of a parallel between physical talisman and the relationship developing between them. A connection that enhanced rather than diminished. Protection that respected boundaries rather than establishing constraints. As sleep gradually claimed them, tomorrow's confrontation requiring rest, despite desire for continued conversation and connection, Lyra found unexpected peace settling over her, despite dangers awaiting with Dawn's arrival. A genuine acceptance that whatever challenges followed, they would face them together, rather than alone. The moon opal pulsed gently against her throat, its cool energy harmonizing with Cassius's warmth beside her. Fire and spirit, traditionally opposed, finding unexpected compatibility through mutual recognition, rather than forced submission or artificial separation. Whatever came after tomorrow, successful banishment or complicated failure, public revelation or continued secrecy, acceptance from others or ongoing opposition to their connection, they would navigate it together, finding way forward through uncharted territory with shared commitment that transcended traditional limitation or established constraint. For the first time since this journey began, Lyra slept without fear of what morning might bring. Not because danger had diminished or threats had disappeared, but because she no longer faced them alone.